you. I'm Sue. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. I want to thank Bruce for asking me to come and share my experience, strength, and hope with you tonight. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's always an honor and a privilege for me to be able to stand up here and talk about where I came from, what happened, and what I'm like now. Because when I was brand new, they told me that sobriety is a gift. You know, it's a gift from God, but you can't keep it unless you give it away. And so it's always my pleasure to do anything in Alcoholics Anonymous because I know I'm the one who benefits. I walk away feeling better, and I think that's a pretty good deal. But I do love this program. I love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started out my life down south. I grew up in Alabama. I was born and raised down there. And the one thing that I wanted to say is when I came into the program in 1976 in West LA, it seemed like every meeting I went into, somebody would come up to a podium like this and they would say, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, keep coming back. And I loved that because I was 23 years old. I was hopelessly depressed. I was suicidally depressed, honestly, but I was afraid to die. And so that was the state of mind I came in here. And when I heard that phrase, it helped me feel like I belonged here. I identified. And so if anybody is new here tonight, and I know we have quite a few people who are new and sort of new, I want to welcome you and say if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, you're in the right place. And my mother and my sister live on the Gulf Coast of Alabama, and I still go down there to see them quite a bit. And when I'm there, I go to what I call my home away from home group down there. And in Mobile, Alabama, they like to say, if you're tired of the high cost of low living, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. And the first time I heard that, you know, I was sober many, many years, and I still knew exactly what they were talking about. I could just feel that in the pit of my stomach. And I hope I never forget, you know, where I came from. So anyway, thank you for having me. And like I say, all I have to share is my story. And I started out, I was born and raised in Alabama. And I grew up in a small town. If you read the book To Kill a Mockingbird, the town was very much like that, even though this was years later, because those towns didn't change. You know, they just kind of stayed the same and went on. We knew everybody in town. And it started out as a nice upbringing until I started to drink, and then I felt like the walls were closing in on me, and you know, and I yearned to run away from there and find a place where nobody knew what I was doing and nobody was, you know, watching me, keeping an eye on me. But I grew up in an alcoholic home, and so my very first introduction to alcohol was my dad's drinking, and he was a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde alcoholic, and he was one of the nicest men you could ever find. But when he started drinking, he would go into a rage. It was usually the middle of the night. We would be up all night. And I was terrified as a little child. And this is many, many years ago. I grew up in the land of the dinosaurs. And back in the day, you know, they put alcoholics in mental institutes like the state hospital. And I remember hearing my mother talking on the phone to somebody about having my dad committed to the state hospital. And I walked around just, you know, living in so much fear. I was just afraid of everything. I thought, you know, I mean, my dad was the breadwinner. I thought, you know, what's going to happen to us, you know, if they take him away and lock him up somewhere. And he was a periodic, so sometimes he was doing okay. And we were raised in the church, and I came up praying a lot. And my big prayer that I was always saying was, God, please make my dad stop drinking. And I thought that was, you know, that was a good thing to pray for. But he didn't. He didn't stop drinking. And slowly but surely, I started to kind of turn my back on God and the church and all of that sort of thing, and I lost interest in it. I thought, how could a loving God allow this kind of thing to go on in my home, you know? We're just 4 innocent children, and my mother was actually a saintly kind of person. She was the choir director. Sometimes she played the piano or the organ in our church, and I mean, I never heard her utter one swear word. She was a teetotaler. I never saw her take a drink. And I just thought, I couldn't figure out how a loving God could allow this. And I turned my back on the church at an early age and went off in my own direction. And I paid the price for that eventually. But I had my first drink when I was around 13 years old, and I went on a trip with my parents, and I got to take my little girlfriend with me, and her name was Julia Ann, and we talked a man into buying us a bottle of bourbon or scotch or something, and he brought it up to our room. And I have no idea where we got the idea to do that or anything else, but we were on a separate wing of the hotel from my parents, and he brought it up there, and we drank the whole thing that night. And I ended up in the lobby of the hotel in seersucker pajamas and a sombrero. And I have no idea where I got a sombrero in Atlanta, Georgia, but I just knew that I had had the best time of my whole life. And I just couldn't wait to do this again, even though it's true that when I woke up the next day, we had trashed that room. I had vomited in a trash can, and the place just, it was vile. It smelled horrible, and I couldn't wait to do it again. I just thought this was the best thing. Because when I drank, and when I arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous years later, when I was 23 years old, down in West LA in the Pacific group, that was Clancy's group. And what Clancy was talking about a lot in those days was this idea that alcohol does something for the alcoholic that it doesn't do for the general population. And I've come to believe that that's true, because I grew up saying, I will never drink like my dad. And once I had that drink, it was like magic. And I forgot, I wasn't going to drink like my dad, and I wasn't going to be like him. And I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to drink more. And so alcohol sort of took over my life. I was a good student. I was in the Honor Society. I was, all good things until I started, drinking. And I used to go with my girlfriend on the weekend. We'd ride horses. And it was just, like this kind of idyllic childhood other than my dad. And but when I started to drink, I started to turn down this dark road. And in the school, I always sat with the good girls at the cafeteria. We studied hard. We did well. And when I got that taste of booze, the day came where I moved across the cafeteria to sit with the party girls, the people who like to drink and carry on. And we used to go across the state line because it was legal to drink at age 18 in Mississippi, and we were nowhere near 18, but they served us anyway at this bar where we would go, the Southern Air. And I would go down to my girlfriend's house, and her mother worked at night, and so we could sneak out and go over and go to this bar. And I just thought that this was the best thing that ever happened. And I had always known growing up that I was going to go to University of Alabama. It was just a done deal. Everybody in my family went there. It wasn't something that I questioned or thought about. But when I got to this bar, there was an all-girls school in the same town with the bar, with the Southern Air. And I didn't want to get too far away from this bar. So I told my mother this big story, cooked up a story on why I wanted to go to this all-girls school, very conservative all-girls school. And, they went along with it. And I went over there, and all I wanted to do was go hang out in this bar, and I had to live in a dormitory, and we could only go to the library, so I would walk out with a stack of books and sign out that I was going to the library, and I would go out to the bar, of course. And I was just having so much fun. And Tom mentioned to me when I walked in the door, he was going to send me a video about a bass player. I hooked up with the bass player in the band in this, and then it just became, it was like Disneyland. I just loved it so much. And one weekend or day or night, or I don't know if it was a weekday or what, my mother was looking for me, and we didn't have cell phones or any of that, of course, in those days, and she couldn't find me, and so she contacted the school, and they couldn't find me, so they had to call the police, and the police found me with the bass player. And of course, this bar was off limits to the girls at this school. We were not allowed to go there at all. But they found me with the bass player, and they took me with the light on top of the car to the police station, like I was a criminal. And And my mother and dad were in the police station that day, and I hope I never forget this scene because I loved my mother with all my heart. And like I said, she was saintly. I mean, she was an impossible role model because she was just such a good person. But I adored her. I loved her with all my heart. And the last thing I wanted to do was hurt her. And she was standing there with tears, running down her cheeks, and my dad looked like, he was always really tan from playing golf, and he looked like he had just turned gray or white or something, and he was standing very still. And I felt like later, when I arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous, I heard this phrase, pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. And that's what I felt that day, and I couldn't believe that I was dragging my mother into this mess. And, it might not even sound that bad today because the world has changed a lot. This was many years ago. But the girls in my neighborhood did not get in trouble like this. Let me tell you, I was the only one, the girls or boys, I was the only one that, got into something like this. And it was horribly embarrassing and humiliating, on top of just my mother, of course, being so worried about me. And I was 18 or 19 years old, probably 18, and I wanted to say that day, Mom, I promise you I'm never going to do anything like this again. I'm so sorry. I'm going to go back to school, I'm going to study hard, and I'm going to make you proud of me. But something deep down inside of me, even at that early age, knew this wasn't the last time something like this was going to happen. And I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I didn't know that until the day I arrived at Alcoholics Anonymous. But I knew that I was powerless and that over something, that I couldn't be good for very long. I wanted to be good. I wanted to do right, but I couldn't do it for very long. And so as soon as I started to feel a little bit better, instead of thinking, gosh, and it never occurred to me that, maybe I should do my schoolwork before I start drinking, or maybe I should go to the bar only on the weekend. I never had a thought like that, never, not one. And when I got to feeling a little better, I thought, I better transfer away from this school and go to the university where nobody will know what I'm doing. I can live in an apartment, nobody will keep tabs on me, and I can do whatever I want. That was my solution. I never saw that alcohol was a problem in all of this. And so that's what I did. I went over to University of Alabama, and there I ended up, I was one of these people who had little periods of time where I did okay, and I cleaned up, and I was doing really well in school and all of that, and I had this nice boyfriend, and we were going to a Rolling Stones concert, and I went over to his apartment, and he was a math major and a pre-med student, and he was handsome, and he was nice, and all this stuff. And I get there, and he's got classical music playing in the background, and he's studying something called differential equations, whatever that is. And I thought, this is too boring. I just can't do this. So I said, I'll see you later. I'm going to go see a friend. I went over to an apartment where I had a bunch of friends, and there was a guy sitting there who had come out from California on a motorcycle, and he was sort of like this on the sofa. His eyes were half closed, and he was loaded on Reds that particular night, and it was love at first sight. I thought, this is the one for me. And he got arrested for sales of cocaine that night, and I married him. I didn't let a little thing like that stop me. I married that guy, and I thought, he said he didn't want to stay in Alabama. He wanted to have his probation transferred to California. This is where he grew up. And I thought, the sun is always shining in California. And the reason I knew that is I had visited my aunt in Coronado when I was 16, and I thought, the sun is always shining. I'll never have a bad day, never have a bad day out there, and people are surfing and having fun. And, down south, we just have so many of these gloomy, gloomy days where the sky is gray, the trees are gray, everything's gray in the wintertime. And I thought, I'm just never going to have a bad day in California. And so I came out here, and I really hit the skids really fast because I no longer had any structure in my life. I didn't have family. I didn't have friends. I didn't have school. I didn't have a job. I didn't have anything other than this guy that I came out here with, and things went from bad to worse. I crashed and burned really fast. But another phrase I heard when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous was about the geographical cure. And I was one of these people who I was always moving from one place to the next. And I thought, in the next place, that's where I'm going to be happy, joyous, and free. That's where my people are going to be. And so I moved a lot. I went to 7 different colleges and universities, and I didn't do that casually. I mean, I was completely enrolled with a major declared and my transcripts on file and, going to classes. 7 universities and colleges like that, and I counted it up the other night, I lived in, I think it was 10 different cities, not including my hometown, and before I got sober. And so anyway, I crashed and burned, and I just knew I needed to leave this relationship. I thought, that's the problem, it's this relationship. I was always thinking, it's this, it's that, it's this relationship, it's this job, it's this school, it's, something, and I would move on. And I never found that place where I was happy, joyous, and free until I arrived at the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. But anyway, I don't want to bore you anymore with drinking. We all know how to drink. By the time I was 23, I felt like I was going to die or go insane. I was living in West LA. I was in a dark upstairs apartment. I was afraid to go out, and I was afraid to stay in. And I was drinking, and the reason that I never thought of drinking as a problem is I drank to go to sleep. I had terrible insomnia, and I knew that if I drank enough wine, I would go to sleep. And eventually, it was if I drank enough wine and took a bunch of sleeping pills, I would have enough to go to sleep. And so I was really a mess when I arrived here in the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, and my life had gotten really tiny and really dark, and all I was doing was going to work, hanging onto that job by a thread in downtown LA, driving home to West LA, and I would try to stop at a different liquor store so that, nobody knew me, and I'd start drinking in the parking lot, and then I'd get lost on the way to my apartment. I couldn't find my own home, and so I was really a mess, and I was in that apartment, and like I said, I became suicidally depressed, and I didn't know what to do. I was all out of answers, and there had been times where I was happy and had a good time in life, and then there were times where I hit the skids. But this last time I felt like, I'm not going to pull out of this. I'm just not going to pull out of this. And there was a hopelessness about it that was just different. And a girlfriend of mine called me, and she lived in Malibu, and she said, how are you doing? And I said, well, I'm just not doing well still. And she said, well, why don't you come on up here to Malibu and we'll lie on the beach and you'll feel better. And I knew there was no way a trip to Malibu was going to make this any better. But I got in the car, I had a tumbler of wine between my legs, and I'm driving up the Pacific Coast Highway, and I had this feeling that I could just go off the side of the highway and end up in the Pacific Ocean, and I wouldn't have to wake up anymore, wouldn't have to face another day. But it terrified me that I had a thought like that, and so I get to her house, and she wasn't a drinker, but her husband was, and so I drank all of his wine, and I woke up the next day, and it was no different than any other day. I woke up full of fear, shaky, sweaty, and but somehow I knew that day that this was different, that I couldn't go on like this anymore. And my friend Dana came in, and she looked at me, and I could tell she knew how sick I was, and it scared me, because I thought, I'd been hiding it and passing for a normal person, which of course I wasn't really, but I could tell she knew how sick I was, and she said, I'm going to take you to UCLA emergency room, and she did, and I ended up lying on a gurney in the hallway there with tears rolling down my cheeks. And I felt like I was the loneliest, most pathetic person in the whole world, and that nobody could know what was wrong with me, and that nobody cared, and there was just a hopelessness and a despair about it. And I don't know if I said that alcoholic prayer, God help me, but I probably did, because deep down inside of me, I had been raised with the concept of God, and I more than likely did. But even if I didn't, I think that prayer was probably in my heart. And anyway, that day when I saw a doctor, and I had seen many doctors because of this insomnia. I had all sorts of sleeping pills and tranquilizers and all that kind of stuff. And we used to joke and say that a lot of doctors back there thought that alcoholism was a Valium deficiency. And so I certainly had my bottles of Valium that I took regularly, and but it didn't really help me much. And so anyway, that day, I just, felt as hopeless as I ever had. But going home from the hospital, when my friend Dana got me home, and I started to walk up the stairs to my apartment, I went right to the refrigerator, poured a glass of wine, and all of a sudden I saw my life pass in front of my face, and I thought, you're an alcoholic just like your dad. And I got on the phone, I called Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't know where I got the idea, don't know where I got the number. And a lady answered the phone, and I said, I feel like bugs are crawling on my skin, and my arms and legs are going numb, and I hear voices at night. Do you think this has anything to do with drinking? And she said, yeah, honey, and it gets worse. And I had sat across from so many doctors, and I never got any hope from any of them, even though I believed they wanted to help me. But that lady, that day, it was the first time I heard the language of the heart, and I knew she knew what I was talking about. And she asked me if I'd go to a meeting if somebody came to pick me up, and I said I would do anything. So she sent a lady named Marty Ligori, who has passed on. And Marty came out and got me, and what I noticed when I got in the car with Marty was that she smelled good. And I knew I didn't, and it didn't matter how many hot baths I took, how much I scrubbed, with soap and stuff. I felt like stale booze was just seeping out of my pores. And a lot of it, too, was shame. I was just so ashamed of myself. I just felt, like so low. And I thought, I can't believe this woman would even let me in her car. I'm glad you're nodding your head. And I can't believe she would even want me in her car. And all I could hear Marty saying was, we don't take the first drink or anything that affects us from the neck up. And this is just my story, and I'm certainly not an expert on alcoholism, but I understood that she meant that all those sleeping pills and Valium and all that stuff had to go. I got that. And it was shocking to get sober. It was shocking. And when I stopped drinking, then I found out why I drank, because I was just miserable. I was stark raving sober. I was crazy. And, it was just a horrible thing. Marty drove me to a meeting every night that first week. And sometimes you hear people say, you might be the first copy of the big book somebody sees. And I'm glad that Marty was my first copy of the big book, because honestly, she was one of the people who saved my life. And she took me to meetings night after night. She would come back and get me. And those weren't all regular meetings for her. She was an older lady, but she came every night and got me for a while. And I walked into what became my home group. It was the Pacific Group, and there were, in those days, maybe 400 people in this gigantic room, and it was the first time I felt like a bat that lived in a cave, and, here I am in this lit up room, and all these people are laughing and talking and joking and hugging each other, and a woman came up to me with a big book. And she wrote the date, October the 9th, 1976, and she said, this is going to be your sobriety date. And her name was Pam, and she's the woman who became my first sponsor. I don't know what she said. I do not know the words that she said to me that night, but years later, I heard Norm Alpe, who was one of my favorite speakers, say, who you are speaks so loud, I can't hear a word you're saying. And that's how I felt about Pam. And when I, thought back to that day, that was how I felt when I met Pam. I felt safe, and I didn't want to leave her side. And I didn't trust anybody, not one single soul, when I got here. But somehow I felt safe with Pam, and I felt like I could trust her. There was just this warmth and kindness that was just, floating out of her. We have an 11th-step prayer in our program. It's the prayer of St. Francis, and it says, Lord, make me a channel of your peace. Make me a channel of your peace, of your love. And I think that's what Pam did. She just opened herself up, and she let God's love and peace just flow through her. She was 26 years old. She'd been sober 2 years, and she was one of the big people who saved my life. If you think you don't have anything to offer, you're too new in the program, it's just not true. And she really saved my life. And she was kind and loving and supportive. But it's also true, she spoon-fed the program to me and she walked me through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's also true that I was surrounded by what I would call kick-ass old-timers who didn't mince words. And I knew, that all that stuff they were saying applied to me. I was just glad they weren't saying it to me. I was really broken and really scared, and I think that's why Pam was so loving and so kind to me. But I knew this other stuff I was hearing applied to me because deep inside, I had the arrogance of youth underneath all of this misery that I was in. I thought I knew everything. You couldn't tell me anything, couldn't teach me anything. And back in the day, they used to say stuff in AA meetings like, take the cotton out of your ears and put it in your mouth. And so I heard these things and I knew I'd better keep my mouth shut. I'd better behave here because I don't want to be thrown out. I had no place to go. Absolutely no place to go. And I was scared and I was miserable. And everything I did, all the suggestions I took from my sponsor and from old timers and from the book and all that, everything I did was because I was terrified of what would happen to me if I drank again. And so one day at a time, I kept coming back. And I think that was the most important thing I think I heard anybody say back in the day was we don't drink no matter what. And keep coming back, keep coming back. It doesn't matter how you feel. If you're feeling hopeless, just keep coming back because it'll turn around. It'll turn around. But I've got to be here and take actions. And that was the revolutionary thing that I learned early on in the program, that I can't think my way into right living. I have to act my way into right thinking, and I need to take actions, and then the feelings will follow. And I had always been waiting for the inspiration, and they said, don't wait for the inspiration, honey. It may not come. And it doesn't. Most of the time, it doesn't. I just need to get up and do something. And this sponsor gave me some real simple instructions. She told me to get on my knees and ask God to help me stay sober in the morning. And I didn't, like I said, I didn't bother telling her, I've got some really big questions about God. I've got some big reservations about all this. I don't know how there could be a loving God in this universe. But I didn't say one word like that. I said, okay, I'll do it. And I've been doing it for 47 years. That the other thing she said was at the end of the day, you get back on your knees at bedtime and say, thank you for another day of sobriety. So I've been doing that religiously all this time. And it was real simple stuff, She wanted me to have a schedule of committed meetings, and I was supposed to show up at those meetings no matter what. And I told her in the early days, I said, Pam, I know the program's working for you. I can see it in your eyes. Her eyes were sparkly, and she was beautiful. And I know the program is working for you, but I think I've gone too far. I'm really dead inside. I don't care about anybody or anything, including myself. And I just don't think this is going to be enough for me. And she promised me that if I made Alcoholics Anonymous and sobriety my number one priority and kept it as my number one priority, that would change. And so I'm always grateful when I can come out and tell anybody who's new that she was right. Pam was right. It has been true. But I have to keep it. Sobriety and Alcoholics Anonymous is my number one priority. If it starts to slip, I don't do so well. So I have to, one day at a time, be diligent about practicing these principles. And we spent a lot of time on the first three steps: admission, acceptance, and surrender. We spent a lot of time on that. It was just getting a foundation. And there was really nothing in particular I was doing other than saying these prayers, getting in my car, going to those meetings, and she kept adding little tiny things in there, like get to the meeting half an hour early, walk around, introduce yourself to people, get phone numbers, give your phone number. She kept adding little things like that. But all these little things that she added have saved my life and have changed my life and given me a whole new personality, like a spiritual awakening is what's happened. But it was a slow process, and I do love Alcoholics Anonymous, and I want to tell you just a couple of things because I never know what I want to say about sobriety except that I had this huge resentment against my dad when I got here. And I know a lot of people have come out of alcoholic homes and have had, grown up with a lot of misery and stuff like that. And I was angry, and I just was furious at my dad, and I never, I was just so angry. I hated him. I didn't want to have anything to do with him. And I would talk about this around these rooms, tell the old timers, tell my sponsor. And they said, pray for him and act like a loving daughter. And I thought, oh my God, I don't think they get it. I've got to tell them some more stories because no, I know that's not the answer. But they kept telling me that same thing, pray for him and act like a loving daughter. And they said, pray for the good things for your dad that you would like to have for yourself. And so finally, I just gave up and I started to do that. And it took quite a long time. It was quite a long process. But the day came where all of a sudden, I woke up one day and it was like somebody had turned on a light switch. And I just saw the world in a completely different way. And the forgiveness that I came to have for my dad, what the crux of it was realizing that he didn't want to be an alcoholic any more than I wanted to be an alcoholic. And I was able to let go of all that hatred. And it was like an iceberg inside of me melted away. And I know it didn't happen. It felt sudden and profound, but I know it happened over a long period of time. Actually, 7 years is what it took. But I never gave up. I just kept coming back, and I kept saying the prayers and doing all of the other things. And I suddenly had that moment, and I had such a strong urge to tell my dad how sorry I was, that I had squandered every opportunity he provided for me. And I wanted to thank him for the example he had set when he wasn't drinking, the example he had set of being honest and generous and community-minded and helpful to others. And when I called him, he was on his golf course, and the guy in the pro shop said, he's getting ready to tee off. And, I am married to a golfer today. There's no way I would ever pull him off the golf course. But I had such an urgency because I thought, what if he dies of a heart attack before I get to tell him this? And so I said, would you go down there and get him, please? And the guy did, and he came up. And when I said these things, he got all choked up. And Alcoholics Anonymous gave me a relationship with my dad. He lived for 20 years after that, and he never drank again. And, I would love to have him come back here today and sit down and just be able to sit here and talk to him. But every trace of resentment and anger that I had was it was gone. It was erased. And I'm so grateful that I stayed, that I kept coming back, even when it felt like it wasn't working. I kept coming back. And I'll tell you a little tiny story about my mother and how I made amends to her over a period of time. You taught me about the living amends and how important it is for me to just live a different way, because I had disappointed my mother and broken her heart in a million different ways. And so I learned to do the living amends and act better and live better. And 6 years ago, my mother was in the hospital. We thought we were going to lose her. She had to have major surgery. She was 90 years old, and she was in this gigantic regional hospital down on the Gulf Coast of Alabama. And I hopped on a plane and I went down there and I ran into her room. She was in the ICU, and I thought, this is it. My mother is not going to pull out of this one. And anyway, she did. Now, this was the days before COVID. So I was the one of the four of us who went over early in the morning and stayed all day in the hospital. And then one of my brothers would come at the end of the day, and he would stay the evening, and we took turns, and it was like a family reunion. I can't even tell you, this was like one of the most wonderful spiritual awakenings I've ever had. And who would have ever thought, you show up. I lived in a hotel room a couple of miles from my mother's hospital for a month. And I went back and forth. I felt like I was on the staff at that hospital. I was there so much. And so my mother, slowly but surely, just amazed all these doctors and everybody as she recovered from this major surgery. And when she started, they had to bring her up out of a coma. And when I could see that she was getting better and that it was hopeful, I thought, oh, I can go to a meeting. Because this was before COVID, and I've always been a meeting attender. I hadn't been to a meeting for a week, which was really rough. And I would stop in the chapel when I'd get to the hospital, and I would go in there and say my prayers, and I would read my readings, have my morning meditation in there. And then I'd go sit with my mother. And So I saw her getting better. I thought, oh, I can go to a meeting. And I looked it up online, and I found that there was a meeting pretty close to this hospital. And I thought, oh, God, I'll never find it. It's in this gigantic Catholic church that literally goes for blocks. They have a school. They've got, all this football field. I'll never find it. I'm a terrible person looking for, if I didn't have GPS, I would never find my way around. But I thought, I'm never going to find a little room in this gigantic, but I heard this little voice inside of me say, just try. And I have come to believe that my higher power, which I call God, speaks to me in this little soft voice and gives me little things to do. And when I do it, I'm always glad. And when I don't do it, I always am sorry that I didn't. But that night I got in the car and I went over there and I found the room very easily, which was shocking. It was, it's after dark because it's Christmas time, so it's dark. And I found it, and I went running in, and there was a flight of stairs that went up to the upstairs, and this was a gorgeous old church in the historic district. They had like leaded windows and lots of crown molding and these beautiful hardwood floors. And I was going up that stairway, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get to go to an AA meeting. And I was so happy about that. I get up there, and I sit down at a table with about 15 people, conference room table in a room. And when it was my time to share, I told them the story I told you tonight about how my mother had to come pick me up at the police station. And I said, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been able to make a living amends to her. And I'm able to sit in her hospital room over there where she's so sick, and I don't have to, thank you, I don't have to jump up and run down the hall and drink something or take something to take away the guilt and the sadness and the shame for the way I've lived, because I've made this living amends. And I was able to be not only physically but emotionally present for my mother and work crossword puzzles with her and read to her and, just whatever we could think of to do in that hospital room. And so I shared this in the meeting, and it went around the table. And when the meeting was over, it was a wonderful little meeting, maybe 15 people. And when I was leaving there, but, when I walked up these stairs, I literally thought of the Stairway to Heaven. Remember that song from the 70s, the Stairway to Heaven? I thought, I'm going to an AA meeting. And when it was over and I was getting ready to go down that staircase, a man came over to me, and he started to hand me his card, and he said, I just want you to know if there's anything I can do for you while you're here in the hospital with your mother, if there's any help you need or anything I can do, I want you to give me a call and let me know. That's my cell phone number. You can call me anytime. And I glanced down, and I see that he's a doctor. And but, when I looked at it a little closer, I realized he wasn't just any doctor. He was the administrator of the hospital, the administrator of my mother's hospital. And this is like a 700-bed hospital. I mean, it's gigantic. And I thought, oh my gosh, I felt electricity just, go up the back of my neck, because I knew that the higher power that I call God was with me. And it's not the Santa Claus God that I wanted to believe was going to give me everything on my list. And it's not the fairy tale God where everybody lives happily ever after, but it's a God who gives me comfort and peace and strength to do the right thing, and I'm just so grateful for that power in my life today. And I leaned very heavily on my higher power, I have to say, but it's been a slow process. And the last thing I'll say is I went through a very painful divorce in my sobriety, the most painful thing I've ever been through. And I ended up having to go to Al-Anon to finally, that was the last piece of the puzzle for me to have peace and to let go of that relationship and what had happened or hadn't happened or whatever, and because I didn't see it coming, and I was devastated. Anyway, I got to the end of that, and some time went by, and I ended up starting to hang around with just a dear friend on the program who went around and he spoke a lot and stuff, and it was a good thing for me just to get out of town and go and do other stuff. And eventually we ended up getting married many years later. But I'm so grateful that I have a home that's full of love, and that he's my best friend, and that I trust him, and I'm just so grateful. But I always thought that Happy, Joyous, and Free was a destination. It was out there somewhere, like out in the Caribbean, over in Europe, you know. I knew it wasn't right here, right now. But I've come to find in Alcoholics Anonymous that Happy, Joyous, and Free is an inside job. And I can be happy, joyous, and free anywhere, anytime. Doesn't have to be anything special going on. Just, you know, just a nice day out walking and thinking that there must be 10,000 shades of green in, you know, all the landscaping and everything that I'm seeing, and just the way the sky looks and the way the air feels and stuff. And I think, oh my God, you know, I could have missed all this. But for the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me, and hope we all keep coming back.
I stand corrected. Sue came to us all the way from Alabama to speak tonight. Thank you. Let's thank her once again.